Hey everyone, welcome to our 9th episode of the Collections Made Digital Unwrapped series. So our Unwrapped sessions cover chats with members of our team, discussions with people from the industry, and that can be from one-on-one chats to wider roundtables, as well as webinars, whilst keeping everyone informed of what we're up to at DebtStream. Now, on to today's session. So we continue to see shifts from new technology, new social media channels that are shifting consumers' attention that all have impact on the collections and recovery sector. Now, this could be from Gen AI, and everyone know the platform like ChatGPT, for instance, to TikTok, which really exploded during the pandemic. Now, with this comes change in our sector. This includes looking at how technology has been adopted, for instance, as you're continuing to look at how you best support customers who could be in vulnerable situations, for example, or how you communicate and engage with your customers based on where their attention is. Now, on that note, I'd love to introduce my guest for today's chat. And so we're joined by Steve Coppard, who has over 20 years experience in the collections and recovery sector, currently working with Aram alongside running his own collections consultancy business. So welcome, Steve. How are you?
Yeah, hiya, Martin. Great to be here. Yeah, very well, thank you. How about you?
Good, good. I've got the typical flu-y type symptoms, everything that's been going around. Everyone seems to be impacted by it. But I swear it seems to hit me at times when I'm recording one of these sessions as well, just to give that nasally voice for the audience.
Yeah. I think I'm lucky in escaping it because I never get out anymore.
Hangover of the pandemic, probably, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Steve, thanks along for coming along to have a chat with everyone today. What would be really great before we get started about anything specific is just to tell everyone a bit about yourself and also your background in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working in debt management since 2001, and I started off working for the government. So it was HM Customs and Excise at the time. I predate HMRC, which makes me feel very old indeed. And I started as a collector on the phones and then basically did every job on the way up and ended up running big commercial contracts, debt management commercial contracts for HMRC. And then the last sort of 5 years of my civil service career, I moved over to the Cabinet Office, where I ended up running the government debt management function. A couple of years ago, I figured I'd been pushing the fairness agenda a lot within government because it didn't really exist. And I knew that there was a lot of moves in private sector, especially the sort of non-FCA regulated part, to push for improvements. I came and worked for a couple of companies, Aram and Just, really helping them out with some thought leadership and looking at how we can just help people to prevent and collect problem debt. And then earlier this year, I say earlier this year, we're in February now, aren't we? I shouldn't say that on a recording. So earlier this year, I then moved to part-time with Aram and Just and set up In Debt for Life, which is my own sort of consultancy business. But I've got a couple of aims with that. One is to help the industry out, and the other is to educate the public with a mission of eliminating problem debt. And I'll be specific about it's eliminating problem debt. We're obviously never going to get rid of debt in its entirety, and I don't think we would want to. But problem debt, we can certainly do something about.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Steve, for giving that background as well. It sounds like you've had really varied career and also some really fun elements in different guises as well. But it's real strong start to the year with a new venture, new journey for you as well.
Yeah, it's really exciting because there's stuff that I've wanted to do for ages, but when you're sort of like, when you're on a full-time rota, you never really get that time to do the additional stuff that you'd like to do. So now being able to create content, look at training plans for organizations, using my network to help people to connect, and again, all with that one goal in mind of eliminating problem debt. I think that's it's a bit of a scourge on our society, in many ways, but there are some brilliant people out there and some brilliant companies that absolutely can do stuff about it.
Oh no, I totally agree about like you're saying, the brilliant people. Is I've I think everyone feels this as well. Once you're in the collections and recovery sector, it feels really hard to get out of. But to be honest, what has been done in the private sector, the FCA regulated sector, and everything over the last like 10 years is brilliant. They're all about the customer, putting the customer at the center of everything they're doing. It's seen a massive shift from what it used to be. Right, there's so much more that can be done and continue to be done, and organisations have continued to evolve and look at that, and the FCA's continue to put in things like consumer duty. But it's also good to then start to having other voices from the industry as well that are looking at also the direct communication to consumers as a general independent brand as well. Right? Because I think this is one thing, and we will get onto this in a moment, everyone, as well. This is one thing that we do see, and we've seen in traditional channels, is how kind of noise outside of the industry can potentially affect what a consumer does and isn't necessarily having the right outcome for them when they unfortunately fall into debt, because it's not necessarily the right advice. So, but before I get into those kind of areas, what I think would be really good, because you've shown like you've had an extensive career in this space, so it'd be great to delve into what you've seen. And I'm assuming you have seen a few occasions like this in the over 20 years, but what you've seen as fundamental for organisations to deal with change. So when new technology happens or new areas for engaging with consumers or new channels evolve, like what is fundamental for organisations to deal with change?
So I think you can probably take that in two different sections. So one, I think, is the firms, the organisations for whom collecting money is like part of their core purpose.
Yeah,
And by that, I mean like the collection agencies, the banks. And with those sort of organisations, you will normally see a greater level of investment in the technology platforms themselves. But
yeah,
then you have other organisations. So let's take, for example, like an organisation for whom collection isn't its core purpose. So you could think of the Department for Work and Pensions. So they will have a level of investment, but there will also be a need for, I guess, what I call supplementary technology. So
yeah,
it's not like the big all singing all dancing platform, which they do have there, but it's looking at the other stuff. So the AI chatbots, the automated income and expenditure. It's where can you actually then start to automate processes, but in a seamless way that engages the customer. I think we've all had that horror story of chatbots, that keep you waiting for 20 minutes, and then threaten to cut you off if you don't answer within 30 seconds. It's not a great customer journey, or the frustration of asking an
yeah.
AI chatbot a question and it doesn't understand what you're saying, and you try so many different ways and you can't get through to a human being. All that sludge that's in the process, it drives disengagement.
So it sounds like actually one of the first points you're saying, Steve, as a starting point to really look at is don't just look at it there and blindly go, oh, okay, we've got new technology. For instance, we've got chatbots, we've got this available. How do I get a chatbot in? Rather about stand back, understand what's the customer journey, what are you trying to achieve as part of this process, and actually, is that the right piece of kit to get it done, or does it need to be complemented by something else to really give the right outcomes and the experience and everything for the customer? But it's an interesting one. It's probably where I've seen organisations where at first it's like, don't just get blinkered by the technology and say I need that in. It is the other side. Step back a little bit. Start looking at the customer journey.
Yeah, it's about knowing what your target operating model is and doing your gap analysis, and then going through some structured problem solving. Structured problem solving, so you can really say, right, in this particular part of the journey, we need to do X. And actually, there are 3 different firms out there that provide products that can do that. Let's go out and look at them, and find out which one we think is going to fit best. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that point as well, Martin, because the platform sort of integration and where people are upgrading platforms or moving from one platform to another, especially if they haven't got specialist help, they tend to be part of sort of big multi-year wholesale transformation programs.
Yeah.
Could actually be waiting an awful long time for a return on your investment. Whereas those smaller, agile, sort of standalone products that automate different bits of the process and improve the customer journey and improve engagement, they can yield immediate returns.
Yeah, true. Yeah, rather than looking at the big wholesale transformations, actually start to have more targeted approaches to it, so you can add value quickly. No, that makes complete sense. That makes complete sense. And I guess, Steve, then, so like you said, customer journey, it's been solved, improved the customer engagement, maybe with those targeted solutions or maybe some of that wider transformation. But that's great. That's great. So you've got that in place. What starts to happen then, for instance, is obviously in this space, you need to get customers' attention, right? You need to engage, get customers' attention. That's one of the fundamental pieces. So maybe you've got some automation and stuff in place where you've improved the technology, maybe some of the Gen AI is helping to improve some of your processes, etc. But one area, and I highlighted earlier about TikTok, is, and you and I have had some conversations on this already, actually, which is why I wanted to bring this through, is customers' attention shifts and changes all the time. So if they've shifted to a platform like TikTok as a channel, be interesting to know, just as a general concept, what are your thoughts on like the ever-evolving engagement landscape? And do you think that also, as well as technology, that we're saying there's opportunity, does the ever-evolving engagement landscape present risk to companies if they're not engaging with customers down those channels?
I think so, absolutely. I think there's a massive risk there. So if you think, I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and I believe from my conversations you're a millennial. So you know, for me, it was MySpace and Facebook. You know, and I think for millennials, it's probably more YouTube down to TikTok. And as we're seeing now, you know, Gen Zs and Gen Alphas coming through, you know, where's Telegram going to go? So I think, you know, you've got to go where your customers are. And it's important because the people who sort of operate in the vacuum that we leave when we're not there are generally counterproductive to the industry, but not just to the industry, but to our customers themselves. And I think what we need to remember, and this is really about putting yourself in the customer's shoes, what we need to remember, we deal with people in debt day in, day out. We know what people in debt look like. We know what the debt process is.
Yeah.
If you look at the way debt has evolved just in the last year, so the Money and Pension Service did a really good survey. They found that 16 million people missed one bill in the first half of 2023. 2 million of those people had never been in debt before. So they've got no concept of what the debt management process is like. So what's the first thing you do when you hear about something that you've never heard about before? Well, I would go on Google. I'd argue that some of the younger millennials and probably the Gen Zs will go to TikTok, will go to YouTube, and they will do their research there. They use that as the search engine.
Oh, it's definitely acting like a search engine now in people's behaviour. Yeah.
So if you get, and you know that I do a fair bit around this sort of stuff. If you go and you look up on TikTok or YouTube and you put in how do I get debt advice, and someone comes up and they're going, oh, don't get debt advice. They're sort of outsourced by the collections industry. They're a wolf in sheep's clothing. Don't go and do that. And that's your one data point that you've got. What are you going to do? Are you going to debt advice, or are you just going to put the letters back in the drawer? Because that actually looks a bit scary now.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it? Really, to be honest, because the debt advice industry, are like the step changes of this world. For instance, independent organisation. They're a not-for-profit organisation as well. They really are there. That is their sole purpose, to help people and find their options to how they help them get back on track and deal with those outstanding debts as well. So the fact that there's potential damaging content and messages saying do not engage with debt advice companies as well is just really crazy. And like you said, it's potentially leaving, if you're not having that educational content there yourselves of what your options are and everything, you're potentially leaving this black hole, an option for customers to just listen to these people, get into a worse situation because they've not engaged with people in the industry. It reminds me actually, Steve, I don't know if you ever saw it, like you talked about Google. I remember when I was first rolling out a self-service platform at one of the credit management organizations in the past, one of the things I recommended to start doing is to start engaging on the forums and everything, because you have the blogs and forums and everything else in itself. Because it's actually, even though it's the exact same premise, the same people, except a different format, different channel. And we were having that before, that people were saying, do not contact because it's fraud, or do not contact this debt collection agency because it's fraud. But once again, like when I started in the industry, it was starting on that shift on the FCA side. It's like, well, no, they really can't. They're regulated. They're here to support you. They have to understand your situation. But once again, because people ignore that, their situation got worse. They didn't deal with it. There was inaction because they had the wrong advice or concept.
Yeah, and there's something really deep about human behavior in this as well, Martin. You know, behavioral insights, behavioral science is another big area that I have a lot of interest in. And so I liken, people in problem debt, especially who are in deep debt and still trying to get credit to get out of debt, which in itself is a crazy notion. But I've been there, so I'm not judging anyone. But it's almost like the same behavior that you see with an addict. Just one more loan and I'll be able to get out of this. Just one more credit card and I'll be able to pay everything back. And so it's really difficult for people to break that cycle, because they have to admit there's a problem that needs dealing with, and that problem could be absolutely huge. And so I think when people go online and they're looking for stuff, there's an element of reinforcement bias that takes place here. So people are looking to have that sort of, oh, the debt management industry is evil. They want something that reinforces that. Now I do this when I'm like buying products. I'll go and like research a product, and I'll find the one that I like, and then I'll only read the good reviews about it. And then if it turns up and it's a bit pants, I go back and all of a sudden I see all these bad reviews that I was just blind to previously. I think there's something really deep about the way that humans interact with this stuff. And if we don't get to the heart of it, that debt management isn't about managing debts, it's about managing people who are managing debts. So we have to put the customer, we have to put the person right at the very front of this. Debt isn't about money, it's about people, behaviors, and circumstances.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that bias, to be honest, like you said, that bias in that side, that really is human nature as well, because you have a particular view about something, you are then proactively looking for those, like those indicators that confirm that bias, like you said. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. And what do you think? What do you think? I know personally you're doing stuff yourself as well to start, and it's early days to start to combat that yourself. But what do you think are the answers? And just to help on that path, for instance, I've looked myself, and Step Change have a TikTok channel, by the way, as well, and I've seen they've started increasing their content, so which is awesome, which is great, and we need more of that. But what else? What are your thoughts? Like, what are you doing, Steve?
So I've sort of work on a multi-platform basis. So I'll take one idea. So I put one out yesterday on vulnerability. So my long form video has gone onto YouTube, and then I'll take the audio out of that and put it into a podcast, and then I'll cut the video down and it goes on TikTok. There's a Facebook page as well. And then just before this, I was in the middle of doing one on credit scores, and this is information for the general public about what's good about a credit score, what it actually is, who sees it, because we all know it's only the person sees it. Everybody else just uses the detail underneath it through a credit risk scoring model. So it's trying to go where people are, because if I'm only on YouTube, half of the millennials and none of the Gen Zs are ever going to find me. And so there's having that strategy, right? So TikTok is about brand awareness. It's about getting people interested in your brand. Instagram is about communicating with people. And YouTube, if you've done both of those things properly, YouTube is where they go, because you've now got a little bit of credibility with them. That's where they go to consume your long form content. And so you need as organizations, I think people need to have these longer term strategies in place that says we will go where our customers are, because in 10 years time, I'll hopefully be retiring, maybe 15. So who's doing that in the organizations that I worked for and have worked for? Who's thinking, well, in 15 years time, nobody's going to be watching YouTube, but actually we've got no TikTok presence. Whereas if we'd have started today, in 10 years time, we'd have a massive TikTok presence. And like I said, what is the next one? The strategy has to say that we'll always go where the people are, because otherwise we're not communicating effectively. We can have all the websites we want. If no one ever goes to it, there's no point really, is there?
So essentially though, but like the core premise of what you're saying is be where their attention is as a first point, but also ensuring then if you are where the attention is, you are putting out regular educational supportive content to kind of combat against misinformation that is out there around the industry and what it means to engage with different companies in the industry as well, because then hopefully that should then start to have a positive general effect that when someone does fall into this situation, they don't get further behind into a bad situation through inaction because they've had bad information.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I found one the other day, Martin. It's a cab driver with 71,000 subscribers on YouTube. And he's heavily influenced by, this sovereign empowerment movement, the freemen of the land. We don't recognise the laws of the UK, therefore we don't have to pay council tax. Just give it a go, right, and see where you end up, because you could end up in prison. So this isn't stuff that doesn't have any impact. This is quite big. I can think of fewer things legally that I would like to happen to me less than go to prison. So this stuff does have a big impact, and yet so that he's found his reinforcement bias in the sovereign empowerment movement. And I'm sitting there going, well, who's telling people what the actual truth of the matter is? Not saying all councils are brilliant and you should pay council tax because it supports public services. That's not my job. That's the council's job. But just to say, actually, this is what the law says, and this is what the best practice says. And if you never ring them up, you'll never find out about discretionary housing payments. You'll never find out about council tax reductions schemes. You'll never find out about your 25% single adult discount. You won't find out about any of that. All you'll find out about is eventually you'll get a court summons and an enforcement agent knocking on the door. And if the judge finds that you've willfully refused to pay, then you could go to prison. So it can't be.
So it's all of these things, like you're saying, something as impactful as going to prison on someone's life, which could all have driven from because they've had uncredible advice from someone who actually doesn't have the background and says they don't really understand the laws, they don't understand anything else, can have that big downstream impact. But what's interesting about some of the things you highlighted is all the support along the way as well. So we've integrated like policy and practice into our platform as one of our partners, and they start to find ranges of other supports. Like you're saying, from benefits, for instance, there might be like discounts on various other bills or other areas to really support that person. And I think it does start to go through a lot of those other areas that you're talking about, for instance, as well on the council tax. So it's like there's lots of areas for support out there. there are, and actually, if they do engage, they're not going to go to prison, right? Like you said. So actually, through this wrong message and everything else, they don't get support, they don't get back on track, and they potentially end up in prison, like you're saying. In that, and I know that's quite a stark scenario, for instance, for that particular one, but this is shows the power of misinformation as well, doesn't it? So your strategy though at core is combat it, get out there, get content, be where the customer's attention is.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always felt like we sometimes feel like finance is dirty little secret in the collections world. It's like we shouldn't talk about it. We're not allowed to talk about it. And I say, no, sod that. I'm really sorry. We do brilliant stuff. We get people out of debt every day. We lift people out of the burden of debt. And actually, you shouldn't underestimate the power of having gotten out of debt and repaid it yourself.
Yeah.
The sense of pride and relief, and the fact you can do anything if you can do that. But doing it in a supportive and compassionate way. And compassion doesn't mean rolling over and just giving people the keys to the kingdom. Compassion sometimes means setting boundaries and saying, actually,
Definitely.
no, this is how we need to do it. It's you're not just paying £5 a month because you can afford to pay £50 a month. And even the debt advice organisations will tell you that because they don't want you kept in debt for longer than you have to be. Because if you are, and then life throws you another curveball, and you're already holding debt, it makes it that much
Yeah.
harder to get up again and drives you straight back into problem debt.
Yeah, it's crazy, really. It's crazy. Once again, it just reminds me though of the example I gave with the Google search rankings of like these forums and everything else, and it's just once again a different guise of it because what I advised them to do at that time is then through blogs, content, and our own content that starts to get indexed on Google instead to drive out those incorrect forums and results so customers weren't seeing it. So it's that kind of content play again. Make sure you have the right content that's out there that gives the right education to the customer. But it's just it doesn't matter where it shifts to, it seems to be the same problem. You're having people that are given wrong advice and it just causes this big circle of problem debt. Right.
Yeah.
Steve, look, I just probably as we're wrapping up, I guess in the last couple of minutes, and this is a bit of a sidestep back from what we've just been discussing, but when we're talking about change and technology, Gen AI over the last year has been one of the big things. ChatGPT, for instance, maybe just for a couple of minutes, just some of your initial thoughts, and who knows, we could have a follow-up session to delve into some of these areas further. But what do you think the impact in this industry could be based on what you know today? And it is evolving quickly.
Yeah, so I think it could be huge. I'd say it's almost certainly going to be huge, Martin. I think people were talking about cloud. We're not going to the cloud. Don't like the cloud. Don't know what the cloud is. And you skip forward a couple of years, everyone's on the cloud.
Yeah.
And I think Gen AI is probably in that space at the moment. And if companies aren't getting ahead with it now, then they will be very quickly left behind, is my belief. Now, what could we do with it? Well, imagine a chatbot that could tailor the reading age of the messaging based on what it's getting back from the customer. So we know that there's a significant number of people who have either poor numeracy or poor literacy skills. You
Yeah.
could do it on the fly. So you could, and you can pin it to a particular customer so that every time they're interacted with, be it via letter, SMS, WhatsApp, Viber, however you're communicating, web chat, it automatically runs through. Think about automatic translation services. So not only would it pin it to the reading level of the person, but you could also automatically translate it through Gen AI into the person's first language. When you see, I did a podcast last year with Muna Yassin from Rooted Finance, and she was talking to me about some of the immigrant communities in the UK for whom English isn't their first language, and actually that can be a driver of debt in itself. but being able to communicate with folks for whom English isn't their first language is really difficult. But Gen AI opens up all sorts of possibilities with that. I think you can build in behavioural insights. You can build in the FCA's handbook. I've been messing around with a GPT myself at the moment just to see what's possible, because I just think it's got the power. Not only that, but where we were talking earlier about new cohorts of people coming in. So with machine learning, you can do this to a degree, but with Gen AI, I think we'll do it so much better. So you will be able to see in real time multiple decision points in thousands of customer journeys, and update your your dynamic next best action code based on what you're seeing in real time, to be able to, so if text message A didn't work with, and the data points getting bigger, we'll automatically flip to text message B and see what that does. And if that starts working, then we might go back to the first population, and after an appropriate amount of time, send them text message B. Doing that in real time across the entirety of the customer journey on thousands of accounts, that's hugely powerful.
No, it's it's interesting. There's definitely a few areas like you said, the reading age, for instance. That's really interesting as a thought as well, and there's massive potential there. And because I can't remember if the average is it like 8 or it's 10 or something like that in regards to average reading age. So that's a massive thing in itself anyway. And then you start to have stuff like people that with dyslexia, for instance, and everything as well, and they might need it to be tailored for them specifically again. So that accessibility piece is really interesting as a thought around the Gen AI side, the ability to do that so quickly and dynamically. I did like the language side as well. Maybe this is some of that confirmation bias that you were saying earlier as well around this, because we have multi-language built into our platform, and we've been pushing our clients to say, well, it's not just about, as we've been moving into different countries outside the UK, centering ourselves, but we've started to, well, it's not just about that. It's about your different populations of customers here in the UK as well. But you can't service everyone. So that translation piece is really interesting as well, like to how you could do that at a far larger scale. Let's wait and see. I think it's ever evolving the Gen AI landscape, and some of the use cases that we're going to see tomorrow aren't here today, to be honest, and it's going to change at pace. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, no, it certainly will do, and all of this sort of leads us into I think like know your customer 2.0, right? This stuff is all there in Consumer Duty. The consumer credit market firms have to do this stuff. Firms have to satisfy themselves that consumers have an ability to understand the communications they're putting out. What better way to do that? Tailor every single piece of communication on the fly to every single customer.
I totally agree. It's personalization on another level.
Yeah,
well.
Absolutely.
And we thought we were done. We thought we were done with personalization, but no, we shouldn't. That's one thing I've realized working in anything to do with technology. It's just continues to evolve. And if you think you've got something right, don't rest on your laurels as well. There's always more to be done. But look, Steve, thank you for joining us today. It's been really, really good conversation as well. And just to everyone else who's been listening today, as always, a final message from me, just to talk about this series. And the aim of our series is to add value to the collections industry using the team's background and experience. So Gareth, Leo, and I have over 20 years of experience in the collections and recoveries industry, like Steve himself, with over 20 years, building out the digital platforms across Arrow Global, Hoist Finance, and others before we founded DebtStream to enable the industry to drive digital collections through our solutions. Well, that's it for today's episode. So thanks everyone for listening, wherever you are in the world. Make sure you keep in touch for our different channels, which we talked about is really important today. So across YouTube, LinkedIn, and other channels that we have in place. And we are experimenting with TikTok, Steve. But look out for the next episode in the series. And Steve, once again, thank you for joining.
Thanks, Martin. It's always great to catch up with you.
Speak soon.